I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today. David Klements has joined us. He's the Clinical Trials Project Manager at the NeuroNext Clinical Research Institute at Massachusetts General Hospital, and he's here to answer all the questions that he can about the upcoming trials. So David, with that, I will leave it to you.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for Nancy and everyone at NDF for inviting me to speak about this trial. I know we're all very excited to get going. So I'll start us off here. Oops, skipping ahead. So this first slide is just a quick overview of what I'm hoping to cover during the time we have here together today. So just as means of introduction, so what is my relationship to the Neuromuscular Disease Foundation? So I've been working for about the past 2 years to develop and initiate this trial, which we will be conducting to test the use of ManNAc in people with a diagnosis of GNE myopathy. And what we hope to learn from the presentation today. So I'm going to start off with just some general background on the trial and sort of how it came to be, how it's structured, and how we are planning to run it. I am also going to touch on, the current status of the trial given the COVID-19 pandemic that we all find ourselves in today, and talk a little bit about how that has affected the start of this study and our plans for the future, and moving beyond the pandemic, hopefully very soon. And how does this study fit in with our larger scientific mission? So our goal with this is, the hope is that through this trial, we'll be able to provide solid evidence to support one way or another to conclusively answer the question of whether ManNAc is a helpful therapy for people with GNE myopathy. And if it is, then to help use that information to support development of this treatment moving forward. So that's sort of what we'll be discussing today. And so can start off with, this is sort of my title slide for the study. So we've got a couple of names for the trial that we're running. The NN109 trial, NeuroNext is the network which is conducting this trial, and I'll talk a little bit more about that network. And this is the 9th clinical trial that we've done, which has been funded by the National Institutes of Health, so that's why we're 109. And then the short name is MAGIN, which stands for Manic in GNE Myopathy. And this is the full longer name of the trial as well, randomized double-blind placebo-controlled multi-center study to evaluate the efficacy of ManNAc in subjects with GNE myopathy. So that's really just a whole slide dedicated to all the things that we call the study that we're working on. And so I wanted to start off by just talking a little bit more about sort of the different organizations involved in the conduct of this study. So the funding for the trial comes primarily from a grant which was awarded by the National Institute of Arthritis and Musculoskeletal and Skin Diseases, or NIAMS, which is a division of NIH.
So we have 25 clinical sites in NeuroNext, and we've added for NN109, the NIH Clinical Center, as a collaborating site. We've got the Clinical Coordinating Center and the Data Coordinating Center. The network was renewed with some new sites in 2018. You can see our website there if you're interested in taking a look at any of the other 8 trials that we have either completed or the ones that are ongoing currently. The network vision for NeuroNext is to expand NINDS capability to respond quickly as new opportunities arise, to test promising therapies for people with neurological disorders, to test those new therapies, and to increase the efficiency of clinical trials before embarking on larger studies by having sort of a network of collaborating investigators that are able to help get grants ready and go to NIH, and then to run the clinical trials once they're funded. Here you can see the NN109 participating sites, University of California at Los Angeles, University of Utah, University of Kansas, University of Iowa, Washington University at St. Louis, Ohio State, University of Rochester, Brigham and Women's, that's where Tony Amato is, Columbia University, and then the NIH Clinical Center where Nuria Carrillo is located. So we've got pretty good coverage of the United States, although it would be good to have some more Northwest and South, but people will definitely be able to come both North and South to come to the center of the country to participate, we're hoping. So the CCC at Massachusetts General Hospital was awarded a grant to manage clinical trial operations for all of the funded studies in NeuroNext, and the Data Coordinating Center at the University of Iowa, where I work, we have a grant to provide statistical and data management operations to conduct remote and on-site monitoring for all funded studies, including NN109. These are the investigators, Nuria Carrillo and Tony Amato, and then we also have a participating investigator at each of the clinical sites that I showed you on the earlier map of the United States slide. But Tony and Nuria will be heading up the trial. This slide talks about the phase 1 clinical trial of ManNAc for GNE myopathy that was published. It was the first in-human study for ManNAc. It was a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled 3-to-1 trial. And single doses of ManNAc were generally safe and well tolerated. One of the findings was an increase in sialic acid attached to muscle proteins after taking ManNAc. And based on that indication that ManNAc is able to restore the main defect in GNE myopathy at the muscle level, we decided to move on, or I should say, Dr. Carrillo decided to push forward with a phase 2 study to see how, I should say a phase 2B study to see if we could get some continued data on the effects of ManNAc on GNE myopathy. Then following that, there was the phase 2 open label single center study at NIH. And they established in that study that oral ManNAc for 30 months was safe for the subjects. However, not all participants tolerate grams twice a day dosing. So they heard that giving the ManNAc 4 grams 3 times instead increased the ManNAc by 15 to 20%, and that resulted in GI consequences. And so that's the dosing regimen that we're currently working on using in the NN109 study. And biochemical efficacy was established in this open label trial through an increase in sialic acid on muscle proteins and also an increase in GNE enzymatic activity. Then, Nuria, I can hear you. David, are you ready to go?
I am ready to go.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was not part of the plan, as we can tell. Yeah, great. So thanks all for your patience. Not my favorite time for the internet to go down in my home, but I'm back. So glad you all are still with us. Right, so continuing on, so the primary objective of the NN109 trial is to evaluate the efficacy of ManNAc in subjects in GNE myopathy. So essentially to determine how well does this medication work as a treatment for people who are diagnosed with GNE myopathy. Our safety objective is, in addition to seeing how well the medication works, we also want to evaluate the long-term safety and tolerability of taking this medication multiple times a day orally. And then as a secondary objective, we're also trying to just confirm, essentially adding a second method of measuring how effective this medication is, the primary objective being evaluating that based on how much decline we see in people's muscle activity. And the secondary objective is getting at the same thing, trying to see if we can note a noticeable difference in people taking this medication by use of this patient-reported outcome measure, which is essentially a questionnaire designed to assess how well you're doing at any moment. So that is that. Okay, next slide. And so these are just sort of the major key points of the NN109 trial. So it is randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. Neither the participants who are taking part in the trial nor the study staff that they're working with at each site will know whether they are taking the active study medication or a placebo, which should look and taste about the same as the medication. And the actual drug we'll be using is actually a powder, which comes in a pouch. So it'll be 4 grams of that dissolved in water, which you will drink 3 times per day. The placebo, which we're using as to test against the active medication, is called erythritol, which is essentially a type of sugar powder. And so we are hoping to enroll 51 subjects in total in a 2-to-1 ratio. So two-thirds of the people enrolled will be taking the active medication, ManNAc, and 1/3 of the people will be taking the placebo. The study will go on for at least 24 months with participants coming in to be evaluated every 6 months. And the overall time frame of this is we're going to have people coming in, continuing those 6-month visits until the last person, number 51, is enrolled and has been on the study for 24 months or 2 years. So depending on how long it takes to get through the enrollment process, the people who are enrolled at the earlier end might have an extra 1 or maybe 2 visits. And then the last person enrolled will just be seen up through that 24-month period. And at that point, everybody will be completed with their visits. So that is sort of the general sort of design of the study. Next slide. Next slide, Julie.
It's show. There it goes.
Okay, just a little slow. There we go. And so this is just a basically a graphic visually representing what I just talked about. So the first study visit will be a screening visit, which is done just to get everybody in the door, confirm the confirmation of genetic testing, make sure you meet all of the other eligibility requirements for the study, and basically just run through that to make sure everything looks good. Take some blood laboratory tests to make sure all of the values we're looking for are within a normal healthy range. And so results of that can take up to a few days to come back just to confirm everything is looking good. But then participants who are still eligible after the screening visit will then come in within 30 days of that first screening visit for the baseline visit. And so that baseline visit is where we will, run through all of the evaluations, test for muscle strength, do some questionnaires, just generally start collecting data on how well you're doing. And at that point, you will also be dispensed the first of the study medication. You'll be instructed on how to take that every day and everything that goes along with that. And then after that, these visits will continue like we talked about on the 6-month basis. So if you were enrolled initially on April 1st, then we'll see you, you'll be seen again at that clinic every 6 months thereafter, October 1st, the following April, and so on, for at least 24 months. Next slide. And this is the primary endpoint outcome measure. So essentially what this is, from the purposes of a scientific design perspective, is we are testing to try and see if we can determine if this medication helps slow down progression of GNE myopathy. And the way we are testing that is to see if there is any noticeable impact on how the disease progresses and the impact it has on muscle strength. So this is a device where essentially you will be lying down on a table and will be asked to provide force against a strap on a few different muscle groups. There's a grip tester, and then there will be shoulder, ankle, hip, and a few other muscle groups where they'll just be testing, how much force can you exert with that muscle group against this machine. And it's a very, accurate, fine-tuned machine, which is going to be testing that muscle strength in those different groups that are being tested on the study. So it's a photo there just to show you what it looks like. And that is the main way that we are using for this study to measure how effective the medication is working as you progress throughout the course of the study. So next slide. And like we talked a little bit about, so safety is going to be evaluated by discussing any adverse events with the doctors and coordinators at each site, any sort of medical issues that you might have had since your previous visit, whether it is related to the drug or not. If you trip and skin your knee, that's an adverse event, up to more serious heart, any sort of medical issues which might come up as well. So we record all of those. There are laboratory tests designed to test various blood levels to see if there's any noticeable issues there as well, vital signs and physical examinations. And so based on the earlier phases of testing with this study, the most common adverse events which were noted, which seemed to be related to the study drug, were gastrointestinal issues, a little bit of flatulence, gassiness, diarrhea, things like that, which were noted in those earlier phase trials. And so the other functional measures we'll be using to test sort of how well you're doing include the IBM FRS, which is that questionnaire I mentioned earlier, where we ask you to report on how well you've been performing, certain everyday activities throughout the study. The Adult Myopathy Assessment Tool, which is a series of sort of, stretches and physical tests to see, how quickly and how well you're able to perform various everyday activities. 6-minute walk test, which is, timing speed of walking up and down a corridor. Timed up and go, which is again timing how quickly you're able to rise from a seated position to standing. Test to see how far forward you're able to reach. And the Jebsen hand test, which is a series of activities designed to test your hand and fine motor abilities. There are also a few other questionnaires which will be included, to see sort of how well you've been feeling and performing tasks throughout the study. And then finally, we will also be providing subjects who enroll in the study with an electronic study drug diary to track every day, whether you've been taking your study drug, if there are any doses that you might have missed, and any, issues which you may have noted, which may be related to the drug, ask you to report those in there as well. So that'll just come in the form of, you'll be provided with a tablet device. I think it's like a Samsung Galaxy sort of pad that will be preloaded with the electronic diary software. That'll be the only software on there that works. So it's, not a great device for much else other than keeping track of the daily study drug dosing, but that should allow you to do that in a way where we don't have to, collect stacks of paper from you every time you come into the clinic talking about how you've been keeping up with your dosing. So that is that. Next slide. And finally, did just want to talk a little bit about the referral process for people who are interested in participating in the study as well. So I was told that Dr. Marianne Husing had spoken a little bit about this at her talk a week or two ago whenever she was a part of this symposium. But an important element of eligibility for this study is to have a positive genetic test confirming a diagnosis of GNE myopathy from a CLIA certified lab. And so basically what that means is it needs to be, genetic testing, which is performed by a laboratory which is recognized and, has completed all of their certifications to say, yes, this lab, knows what they're doing and has an accurate accounting of ability to diagnose GNE myopathy. So that will be part of the screening visit when you come in, just bringing in a copy of that testing to confirm that it is in good shape and, documents that diagnosis. And so if you already have that testing, previously done, that's great. If you do not, if you're unsure whether this test, which you may have had, meets those standards, or if you are looking to obtain a copy of genetic testing results from a certified laboratory, you can reach out to Andrea Bowling, who is a nurse practitioner who works at the National Institutes of Health with Dr. Carrillo and Marianne Huizing and the folks down there. So her email address is here, andreabowling@nih.gov, and she should be able to help you confirm if that testing is valid, or if you need to obtain that testing. The NIH has a program to help people with suspected GNE myopathy connect with that testing, so she should be able to help point you in the right direction there. If you are interested in participating in the study, then the best way to get involved is to reach out to whichever of our 10 clinical study sites is physically closest to you. We would want you to be, attending whichever is the easiest for you to get to for all of these visits, which are part of the study. So I think it was earlier in the slides, we have 10 sites throughout the United States that are participating as study sites. And if you go to this link here in the slides, or if you, go to clinicaltrials.gov and search for ManNAc, you should be able to find our trial relatively easily. We are listed on there. We're currently listed with the status of active and not yet enrolling, which is accurate with where we are right now. But there's contact information for people at each of those study sites. So if you are in Utah and looking to get involved, you can reach out to the folks at the University of Utah. If you're in New York City, the information's there for Columbia University and all the other sites we're working with as well. So it seemed like a lot of information for this slide, but that URL should have all of it for you there if you're interested in looking up wherever is closest for you to get to. Okay, next slide. Great. And so these last couple of slides I have are just sort of a brief update on where we are with the study given the current state of the world and the COVID-19 pandemic, which has been going on. So sort of before this pandemic impacted, throughout the United States and the world, we were hoping that we would be able to start enrollment on the study in early spring 2020. That coincided sort of with the beginning of the problems that we've been having since then. So all of our study sites are currently at a point where we are not able to enroll subjects on the trial yet. So that has unfortunately slowed us down a little bit. I know we at the central study team are all very sort of frustrated and disappointed that that is the case. But it is sort of what wound up happening. So, in the interest of ensuring the safety of all of our participants in the study, as well as the staff who would be participating in the study visits, none of our sites are currently open to active enrollment, and no participants have yet enrolled to begin the study. Of those 51 subjects we're hoping to recruit, none of them have started up quite yet. The specific restrictions which are in place do vary a bit based on the geographic area and the ability of staff at each site to conduct clinical visits. As of right now, nobody is enrolling, there are other clinical research trials which are going on in various fields throughout, hospitals all over the country, which are sort of adapting for the ability to have more remote visits. This is something which we considered and we would like to be able to do more of, but really the most effective way we have of testing progression of GNE myopathy is through this QMA muscle assessment, and it is, essentially a hands-on test where you're on a table interacting with a physical therapist. So there's not really an effective way that we have for this trial to move our visits remotely, as nice as that would be. So that has not been great. However, I did want to stay here with you just to sort of give you the message that we are still optimistic moving forward. So next slide. And so our plans for these features. So despite all of these challenges, we are still here. The study team is here. The NeuroNext network is operating. Me and my colleagues at Mass General Hospital, Julie and her colleagues at the University of Iowa. The NIH is still operating. All of our clinical study sites are still there and ready to begin enrollment when it is safe for us to do so. We don't have an exact timeline for that right now, given the state of the pandemic and sort of how things are reopening. It is possible that certain parts of the country might be ready to begin having patients come in before other parts. We are in constant communication with all of our study sites across the US, as well as the NIH, our business industry partners at Leadient Biopharmaceuticals. All of these groups were talking constantly to reassess where we are. During this downtime, we have been working on refining and fine-tuning some of the specifications with our QMA equipment. Our plans and questionnaires that we've been doing, we've had a little bit more time than we anticipated to sort of make sure all of these things were finalized and in place right when we are ready to get going. So I guess this is just the main takeaway that I wanted to provide to all of you is that although this has slowed us down, it has not stopped us. We are still here. We're still very invested in pursuing this treatment with the GNE community, and we do want to make sure we give it the best possible trial that we can moving forward. But that may be a little bit slower to get started than we had hoped, and it may be, I don't think we're going to have all 10 of our study sites starting up and enrolling all at the same time. Depending on what the situation is at each locality, we may have, I know that New York City in particular, as an example, was particularly hard hit, so that may be a little bit slower to reopen than some of our sites, say in the Midwest. But we're keeping a very close eye on it and just doing everything we can to ensure everybody is ready to go as soon as we can. So, I guess it's not the best news we could have, but we do want to just make sure that we're being as safe as we can and looking after the safety of our patients and our study participants, as well as our study staff. So as soon as we are ready to do so, we will start opening this study up, and more information will be forthcoming when we have it, as far as how exactly that is going to work and sort of which locations will be opening up when. So I think that was about my last slide. Next slide.
Okay.
Yeah. So
David, thank you. Thank you so much for hanging in with your Wi-Fi. I know that wasn't easy for you, and it's stressful when those things happen. And Julie, thank you for pinch hitting there for us. I'm going to now introduce Dr. Carmen Bertoni, who's NDF Scientific Director, to lead us through some questions that people have and go over these key takeaways with you. And I'll be back at the end just to thank everyone and say goodbye.
Yeah, that was a beautiful talk and a very insightful presentation. We have a few questions coming in, and I want to start off with one question that my personal question that often comes out with the patients. You mentioned that there will be 15 subjects or participants that will be enrolled in the study. Is there? Can you explain why, how this number was chosen? If you have any insight on how the number was chosen, and a little bit about what it means for statistical significance at the end of the study?
Sure. Yeah, so the 51 number was arrived at. The phrase you mentioned there, statistical significance, is a large part of it. So we're essentially trying to enroll this study in a way where we can study this with the fewest number of participants that we can, while still being able to provide, full, robust results to conclusively answer the question, is this medication working like we want it to? And so the exact mathematics behind it are beyond me. I can't speak to exactly how that works, but our statisticians who worked with the physicians to develop this study took a look at this and decided, essentially, if we have 50 people, we will be able to gather enough data over these 2 years to punch these numbers into statistical analysis and say there is a noticeable effect or there is not a noticeable effect that this drug has on people who are taking the drug versus people taking placebo. The reason we want to keep our number to the smallest number possible is there's a few reasons. One being the drug is just very expensive to make right now, since it is not a medication which is on the market in the United States. It takes a lot of time and effort by our partners at NDF Biosciences to just produce this medication for use in the study, which we're very appreciative for. But it does mean that we're able to afford, essentially, to enroll that many people. And then the number is 51. Statistically, we need about 50 people, but since we're enrolling people 2 to 1, 2 people on the active drug for every 1 person who's on placebo, 51 is divisible by 3, so we can have 17 people on placebo and I think 34 on active drug, and that way our numbers check out that way as well. So does that answer the question?
It does. We have a question from Atul, and I think this is the question that everybody wants to ask. Is there any chance that the trial will start this year?
We really hope so. That is our goal, and I wish I could give you a better answer than that. Like I said, it's dependent at this point in large part on how things progress with the COVID-19 pandemic and if there is a way where we'll be able to start doing these visits in a safe way. So it's possible we may be able to get a couple sites up and running sooner than others. And I really hope that we can get it done this year. And I know we're right there with you, but I unfortunately can't give a solid answer right now.
And again, from Atul, is this a phase 3 trial or is still a phase 2 trial?
This is technically classified as a phase 2 trial, but it is a pivotal phase 2 trial. So the hope is, a phase 3 trial would be a little bit larger and, more robust in how it was run. But given the availability of the patient population, GNE myopathy being as rare a condition as it is, this is, I guess, a large phase 2 trial, which if it does show positive results, we are hoping that that could still potentially contribute to filing to make this drug available to people with GNE myopathy if we're able to obtain positive results at the end of this trial, which we all hope we can.
Mangesh is asking, are the patients on the control arm of the placebo going to be switched to the ManNAc drug at the end of the study? And if not, do you have a plan to do an extension study with a crossover for those placebo patients?
That's a great question. So this current grant that we're operating under right now only has those 2 years of follow-up, which will take us to the end of our grant that we have right here. It is possible that there could be an open label extension or some other, further availability of drug made to participants at the end of this study, but that is not something that we have available right now. If that were to happen, it would be something which essentially would need to come in addition to what we have right now. So I guess the answer to that is, as of right now, I don't know the answer to that, but I think that is something that we would hope might be able to be made available eventually, but that's still a couple of years down the line right now.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on the success criteria for the trial? What is the statistical significance that you need to achieve to make this a successful drug, or it's a relative increase, or it's an absolute increase?
So the thing which would demonstrate an unequivocal positive result for this trial is if, when we are comparing the people who are on active medication against those who are taking the placebo, are we able to see a slowing in the decline of muscle function in people who are on the active drug? So it is fairly well documented at this point based on the natural history studies, which Dr. Carrillo and her group at NIH have done in the past with GNE patients. Sort of the pattern that is taken with patients, first ankle drop begins to happen, and then other muscle groups begin to lose muscle strength over time as well. And so the sort of path that takes is fairly well documented. And so our goal with this study is to say, okay, this person is coming in, say they were diagnosed with GNE 5 years ago. We know that the typical course that this disease would take would be starting at this muscle group 5 years in, and we'll see if we can, what the decline in that muscle group, which is, at the 5-year mark, would normally look like versus what it looks like in this person. And so you can probably tell from the way I'm answering this question that I'm not a statistician, but the goal is, if the drug is working, we will be able to show people are declining at a slower rate than we would expect to see on the active drug compared to the people who are taking the placebo. So that is sort of the outcome that we're hoping to see if the drug works.
I have another question. This comes from me. With the second wave, possible second wave of pandemic coming in, is the NIH considering, or is the group considering alternatives on how to do the assessment in patients that have already initiated the trial? Or would you guys have to restart all over again?
We would not need to restart all over again. We actually have not had any patients begin on this trial yet. The timing was such that the first wave of this pandemic hit right before we were planning to begin opening enrollment. So there is actually, as of today, not anybody actively enrolled in this study. I know that the group has discussed potential alternatives for assessing progression of the disease. It is really difficult. The best way that we know of right now is through that QMA measurement. So I know that this is something that we're keeping a close eye on and continuing to discuss and brainstorm. And I guess the best answer that I have today is we don't currently have an alternative to the QMA measurements. But if we're able to identify that one, I think we're certainly open to it. We just, it's difficult, especially with a rare disease population like GNE, to find a way to accurately measure decline. And again, since the course of this disease is over many, many years, it also makes it a lot more difficult to if it were a rapidly declining disease, then we could assess a change much more quickly than something like GNA, which has a longer term sort of course to the illness.
And along the same question, is the team considering doing QMA with social distancing in place? For example, requiring patients.
I'm sorry, I think I missed the end of your question. QMA with social distancing, for example, and then you cut off.
For example, requiring patients and staff to wear masks.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is something we're considering, and it is possible when sites begin reopening. Again, depending on the specific requirements at each of the hospitals where we're working with to see patients for this study. It is very possible that when we do begin enrollment, it may be a requirement that people are wearing masks and, physical therapists are wearing masks and things like that. But I think we're still at the point where we are not. Local requirements at each of our sites are sort of not confident enough to allow quite yet patients to be coming in and participating in activities like the QMA, where you are potentially exerting and breathing heavily. The physical therapist it does need to support you physically in some positions and things like that, and it's just sort of a very close-up assessment, so that we're looking at how that might be able to be done, but so right now we're just sort of doing the best we can.
Of course. And Mangesh is asking, are you concerned with patients dropping off the study for any reason, and as a result affecting the study with such a small group of participants, and 51? I think we're going back to the statistical analysis, but I guess what the question is also, with the COVID-19 and everything that is happening, is there a risk there are more patients dropping off the trial because they're scared of COVID-19?
I mean, I do think that is a risk, and that is another thing that is going to factor into, when we are in a place to begin enrollment, we want to make sure we're doing so in a way that is as safe as possible for our participants, so that hopefully they're, able to feel good about continuing to come in for visits, and that is something that we're very mindful of. It is difficult with any trial to just make sure people are staying engaged and part of the study. And, we want to make it easy for patients. A couple of the ways we're doing that, the electronic study drug diary is actually one of those. Excuse me. In that, it allows the teams at each clinic to see, if patients are keeping up with, taking their drugs. So if there is, some reason why they might stop taking the drug, partway in between visits or something like that, the study staff can be alerted to that sooner and, give them a call and say, how's everything going? Is there anything I can do to help you? Is there a reason you stopped that I could maybe help troubleshoot for you? And things like that. Participant retention is an important part of the study, and we do just want to make sure we're creating a safe environment for our participants, as well as one where they feel like they're being treated well and seen, and have the opportunity to participate in as safe and productive a way that they can. So that's definitely something we're keeping a very close eye on.
One more question is, can you elaborate a little bit more on the need to have so many different sites, even though the number of participants enrolled are only 51?
The need for having so many different sites, like the different clinic sites?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, the short answer to that is that we want to be able to recruit as broad and representative a group of GNE myopathy patients that we can to participate in the study. And so, you know, it is a rare disease, although we're not enrolling a huge number of patients for a clinical research trial, only at 50. We do want to try and get people from as many different physical locations as we can, and to make it, you know, feasible for as many people from as many places as we can to enroll. You know, if we were only based in one place on, you know, the East Coast, there's, for example, there's the possibility that, you know, there might be another group, you know, maybe a large extended family out somewhere else in the country who would like to participate but isn't able to make that trip. You know, it's really just in the interest of making it as easy as possible for as many different people from as many different places as we can to participate.
And to be a potential participant in the study, do you need to have been in different studies before, or what is the eligibility criteria for the enrollment?
Yeah, you do not need to have participated in any previous clinical research trials. If you have, that's fine. That is not something which factors into your eligibility at all for this trial, though. Basically, we're looking for people who have a, you know, well-documented diagnosis of GNE myopathy, as evidenced through that testing we spoke about earlier. People who have some muscle group which is able to be tested, which is not so far progressed as to be unable to show any decline. So, you know, we want to be able to make sure you're in a place where if this medication is working, we're able to document whether it's declining at a slower or faster rate. So that is why the QMA at the beginning of the study is so important, to assess where you are physically with muscle strength. And then there are just a few other assorted requirements to basically make sure that the medication or any of the other assessments which we're doing as part of this study would be, you know, safe for you to take and participate in. If for whatever reason someone has a documented allergy to either the drug or the placebo, which is not common and not likely, but is possible, obviously we wouldn't want to put that person at risk by enrolling them. So, you know, there's just a few additional measures in there, like just to make sure that participating in this study won't cause any other problems for you in your life as well.
There is one additional question. Given that it takes so long to recruit patients, would it be a good idea to just start doing that now and then wait for the reopening before starting the actual dosing of the patients?
Yeah, well, that is, I think, one place where we would welcome hearing from participants. If you are a patient who has a current diagnosis of GNE myopathy, I think there's no reason why you can't go to clinicaltrials.gov, figure out the location which would be best for you to travel to, and reach out to the staff at that site just to say, you know, I am here, I am interested. When you're ready to begin enrollment, I would love to be a part of it. And you know, we can never make any guarantees. If your situation changes, if the things change slightly with the study, that everybody who expresses interest will be able to participate. But I think that that is something which could be helpful when we are ready to begin going, for sure.
And Tara is asking, will the NIH site be the only site accepting international patients?
I believe that is the plan right now. and the reasoning for that just being related to regulatory requirements for working with patients coming in from other countries. You know, the rights of the local countries that they're coming from maybe might have an impact on their ability to participate in research here in the United States. That is something that the NIH is equipped to deal with. They are used to dealing with international patients. Other sites that we have may or may not be well equipped to do that. But that is something that we can sort of talk about on a case-by-case basis as well. Yes, if it is something where someone from a country outside the US is interested in participating and would be flying to the US in order to do so, then it would be most likely that, yes, they would be seen at the NIH site in Bethesda, Maryland.
We have one very interesting question is, are patients that are heterozygous in the GNE gene, and that, in other words, that they have two different mutations, eligible for the study?
So they have two different mutations in the GNE gene, both of which would potentially cause GNE myopathy.
Yes,
don't
correct.
believe we have.
Or even just one of them, right? As long as they're confirmed to have a GNE myopathy, but it's not the same mutation on the both alleles.
Now that is something which I think Marianne may be able to speak to slightly better than I would, but my understanding is that any genetic mutation which leads to a confirmed diagnosis of GNE myopathy would be would make you a potential eligible participant for the study. Yes, based on that.
Okay, I want to touch base 1 second on the importance, if you can elaborate on it, on the importance of not taking ManNAc while you are on the study, because I know that many patients are considering doing that even though they are enrolled in a study, not knowing whether there would be a placebo or an active group. Can you please elaborate?
Absolutely, and that is a very important piece. As you know, our goal with this study is to hopefully determine conclusively whether or not ManNAc works as a treatment for GNE myopathy. Right now, as we know, we suspect it may be helpful, but the evidence is not there yet to support basically the FDA saying, yes, this is approved to produce and prescribe for GNE myopathy. So the placebo control piece of this study and the dosing, which is regulated as part of this study, is really critical to the importance of making sure the study works and shows accurate data, which we can point to then and say, this drug works, or maybe it doesn't. But if there are participants who are taking part in the study who are taking additional ManNAc, which they're getting from some other source, that would make any results that we might get from the study essentially invalid. If they are in the placebo group and taking ManNAc, then what winds up happening is they change the results to say, look, there's no difference between the placebo group and the active group. And we say there's no difference, so the drug must not work. So that, you know, that could skew our direction one way. If you're taking the active drug and you're also taking ManNAc from another source, that could potentially increase the likelihood of side effects. It could, you know, skew the results where maybe the lower dose, which they had been taking just in the study, would have been effective, but by adding a second dose on top of it, maybe that reduces the effectiveness of the drug. You know, we just don't know. So, like, really ensuring that everybody who's participating is taking the dose that is expected that they're taking is the only way that we can be sure that if this drug works, we'll see the results we need to see. So that is really important, that anybody enrolled in the study is not taking additional ManNAc, which they might be getting from some other source.
Thank you very much. That's an important point that needs to be made at every single talk. And just for the recording purposes, Mariam responded to Mangesh's question about the two different mutations. And her answer is yes. If you have two different heterozygous GNE mutations that are determined to be disease-causing and has to be a US CLIA certified lab, you are genetically eligible for the study. And if you don't have the CLIA certification, there are ways to obtain one. And I think that answered the question of the two possible mutations, different mutation on the GNE gene.
Excellent. I'm glad Marianne spoke up on that one because she is much more of an expert in that area than I am.
Okay, and we are done with the questions, and we are all considering we are in the good timing, and I'm gonna pass on the mic to Nancy that can wrap it up. Thank you.
Okay, we made it, everyone. Thank you all for your patience today. Thank you for joining us. I'm so glad that we could ultimately get this very important information to all of you. Thank you to Carmen, David, and Julie for their presentations today. I think it's really important that we get this information to everyone, and I'm so glad that we've found a forum to be able to do that. Hopefully you can join us next week. We'll be at 9 a.m. Pacific time, just so you know, make a note. You'll see it on our social media posts, but we are starting at 9 a.m. next week with Dr. Tassin Mozaffar from UC Irvine, who's going to be talking about a program we're developing for a GNEM specific multidisciplinary in-person and telehealth clinic that's really exciting, and he'll be joined with a presentation by NDF's Emotional Wellness Director, Carol Gelbard, who's going to speak about her component of that program. We're really excited about launching something new that I think all the patients are going to find really helpful and engaging. And just as a last reminder, the edited recording of this presentation will be up on our website very soon, and you can find that at curehibm.org. So thank you all for your patience. Thank you for spending the time with us. And I hope that you all stay home, you all stay healthy, and you all stay in touch. Thank you, David.
Thank you.